Thanks, Teresa. Well, before I jump in, I just want to thank Erica for her music selection this morning. I think that's such a wonderful image. The song was about a house with a crowded table. And I thought how appropriate for an organization like 100 Rural Women that is really all about bringing women to the table so that we can connect and learn from one another. And so I thank you for coming to the table today. And I am going to share a little bit about our pilot of the 100 and 100 project. Let me start by telling you a little bit more about myself. My name is Kate Stower, and I'm a former educator. I taught high school social studies in Bemidji. I worked at the Minnesota Historical Society, and I also supported educators at the Minnesota Department of Education. I'm the wife of one very patient husband, especially when I announced that I wanted to quit my job and go back to grad school. And I'm the mom of 3 wonderful kids, 1 dog and 2 chickens. And we live in Minneapolis, but my heart is really in rural America because I grew up in northwestern Wisconsin in a small town. I'm also a cancer survivor, which started me off on this journey to make the career switch that I had been thinking about for a long time. And for the past 3 years, I've been a grad student at the U of M. And I was fortunate enough to get hired by Teresa Kittredge last fall as a graduate research assistant. And I have learned so much from both Teresa and our project partner from RSDP, Linda Kingery. This project was a culmination of so many things that I have explored over the course of my graduate studies. And our team was constantly challenging one another to find more equitable and effective ways of community engagement that would help lift up rural women. So I will forever be grateful for their support and mentorship, echoing so many of the women in this study who commented on the value of these resources. So the first question is, are there fewer women in leadership roles? And the answer, unfortunately, is yes. Despite making up 50% of the state's population, women are underrepresented in national, state, and local elected positions. Only 17%, less than 1/5 of county board chairs and Minnesota mayors are women. Even in a female-dominated field like education, only 1/4 of superintendents are women. And you can see in this picture, this is from a newspaper article recently. It is a small town city council meeting in Minnesota. I won't name any names, but as you can see, the entire audience is male and the presenter is male. And unfortunately, this is not a unique situation. So why do we need women in leadership? Well, women bring unique skills and perspectives to leadership that are vital for our rural communities right now, especially as they are rapidly becoming more culturally diverse. A study by Aldana Silvia showed that compared to male leaders, women are more likely to be nurturing, democratic, inclusive, reciprocal, creative, resourceful, open, and accepting of diversity. It is particularly important to have women of color and Native American women in leadership because studies have shown that they better represent the interests and issues of their communities. Given this disparity of women in leadership, Teresa set out on a mission to figure out how to better support women and enable them to take on more leadership roles. Thanks to funding from RSDP and CURA at the University of Minnesota, the pilot of the 100 and 100 project was born. The pilot focused on northwestern Minnesota, which we roughly define as these 3 Native nations and 16 counties. There were 3 main research questions we wanted to explore in the pilot project. The first was, what leadership barriers do women face in northwestern Minnesota? After living in Bemidji, I knew the answer to this question was snow. So much snow. Okay, in all seriousness, we wanted to know what are the main things holding women back beyond the occasional snowstorm. The second question was, how can we support and empower women to take on more leadership roles? And the third question was, how can we identify, connect, and build stronger networks in northwestern Minnesota? There were 4 phases in the pilot project. In the Lit Review, I looked at research related to women's barriers to leadership in elected office, business, academia, and other fields. The benefits and challenges of mentoring for women, the benefits and challenges of women's networks. I also explored best practices in online focus group facilitation and online learning. I tried with limited success to find research focused on women's leadership, specifically in rural areas or small towns. The second phase of the pilot project was a survey targeting individuals who were women over the age of 18 who had lived, worked, or had a connection to Northwestern Minnesota. The third phase of the pilot project was a series of 4 convenings or online meetings held over 2 weeks in March. The last phase was to wrap up the pilot project and prepare to scale up for the statewide launch of 100 and 100. We also established a Facebook group for Northwestern Minnesota women who participated in the pilot project to continue to connect. If you're from Northwestern Minnesota, find us on Facebook. Beginning this summer, I guess that's now, how is it June already? 100 and 100 will be moving across the state with the ultimate goal of holding 100 virtual convenings. And Teresa mentioned a little bit about this earlier. So they'll be starting with 30 meetings this summer, but eventually we'll host 100 virtual meetings across the state. So let's dive in and look at the findings from our pilot project that will inform the statewide project. The survey we launched in phase 2 resulted in 169 responses. We used the snowball invitation method, as we called it, inviting an initial group of connectors to extend the survey invitation to women in their networks and so on. There were 22 questions, of which 6 were just demographic questions. And 84% of our survey respondents were aged 27 to 64. At least 11 of our survey respondents were women of color. The highest number of responses were from Polk County, and our Herculean effort to do outreach and identify women in every county resulted in getting survey results from across the region. The 4 convenings held during phase 3 had 2 main goals. The first was to conduct a focus group and get feedback on how to establish a women's network that could provide support and help rural women overcome barriers to leadership. And the second goal was to provide networking time that would allow participants to see what a women's network could offer. So at these 90-minute convenings, all conducted virtually via Zoom, we hosted a total of 41 participants. They self-selected after receiving a mass invitation to our newly established contact list. Many of them were also survey respondents, or by following a link on the website or social media. Similar to our survey, 80% of the participants in our 4 pilot convenings were ages 27 to 64. At least 10 of the convening participants were women of color. And similar to the survey, we had attendees from most of the counties in Northwestern Minnesota represented at the pilot convenings. So you can see a map here of where all of the women were from who participated in the pilot convenings. In phase 3, the convenings yielded many sources of data, from the registration form to an online evaluation form. Although we exceeded our goal of 100 survey respondents, the quantitative researchers would say that our study had a relatively small sample size. In addition, because we did not have a random sample, the results also reflected a response bias. The women who took the survey and participated in the convenings were self-selected as well. So the results may overrepresent certain groups or interests, such as leadership. Turns out over 70% of our survey respondents self-identified as a leader. So clearly our project on women's leadership attracted women who are already interested in leadership. However, I did a quantitative analysis in which the significance test showed that there were almost no statistically significant differences in the responses between self-identified leaders and the non-leaders who completed our survey. Although our team used the term network internally, we realized very quickly that many women do not use this term to describe the community groups that they are involved in. So we emphasized in the survey and in the convenings that we were using networks, organizations, or groups that you are a part of interchangeably. Our study also faced the challenge of defining the word leadership. Some women have a negative association with the word leader, or they think only of leadership with a capital L in terms of publicly elected or appointed positions instead of other kinds of leadership in more private family and community spaces. So after exploring this in the first convening with this Menti poll, we determined that it would take more than 90 minutes to construct a definition of leadership. So in the next 3 convenings, we just encouraged participants to think broadly about leadership.
Recording in progress.
One convening participant captured some of these ideas around leadership, saying, "I like the definition of a leader as someone who brings out the best in others. I could get behind that. That is more aligned with who I am." We need to get away from the traditional stagnant ideas of leadership around power and privilege and money. Women's experiences this year crossed a wide spectrum. For some, COVID was a positive time, while for others it brought illness, loss, and isolation. For example, one woman remarked that COVID has led me to virtual communities to create art, do yoga, and write stories. Another talked about feeling disconnected from her work colleagues, saying, "It's hard to see behind the screen what's really going on with someone's life. You forget to be real and let people in when it's just a screen. I feel like we find it easier to mute ourselves in more ways than one now." We were conducting this research study in the midst of a once-in-a-century global pandemic. And we acknowledge that what we heard from women reflects where they are at during this very complicated time. It will be interesting to see if the findings from this pilot hold as life changes in the post-COVID world. So, what did we find out about barriers to women's leadership? There are different kinds of barriers for women. Some describe them in terms of external and internal barriers, or societal and individual barriers. One framework that I liked describes barriers for women in terms of 3 buckets: structural barriers, institutional mindsets, and individual mindsets. In our survey, we asked 5 questions that were related to barriers. When asked to rate the most significant barriers for women in general, survey respondents identified caregiving responsibilities as the #1 barrier. Second was the perception that employers do not provide women opportunities for advancement. Gender bias, assumptions about who the breadwinner is in a household, and community beliefs about who should have power may all be playing into employers' decisions about promotions. As one survey respondent said, "Men are the leaders in our community." The #3 barrier identified by women was the double standards that women face. As one survey respondent said, "I think women have to be more organized, smarter, and more composed. Sometimes if we are assertive, we are seen as aggressive. Sadly, I think we have a long way to go. Rural Minnesota still holds on to some of those archaic beliefs about a woman's role. Sometimes I feel like it is a game that we have to play in order to be heard." If you want to look more closely at the responses to all 15 of these statements, Teresa will be sharing the full presentation after the webinar. All of the top 3 barriers are related to 2 of the buckets: institutional mindsets, such as community pressures and gender roles, and structural barriers, such as promotion practices. In fact, if we look at all of the top 6 barriers identified for women's leadership in general, only 1 is related to women's individual mindset or lack of confidence in their abilities. So how much of the disparity in women's leadership is related to the 3rd bucket, which is individual mindsets? Survey respondents overwhelmingly believe that women are as skilled, experienced, and have the toughness required for leadership. Women felt most strongly about the statement, "Women leaders are as skilled as men." Interestingly, when another survey question asked how to help other women like you develop leadership skills, a large number of women made comments related to building confidence or skills such as self-advocacy. Many comments in the convenings also referenced lack of confidence or self-doubt as a barrier to women's leadership. One participant said, women are put into leadership role. When women are put into leadership roles, we almost become apologetic. We aren't a bitch. We aren't just being assertive. Sometimes women have to be more assertive because others don't see the vision. Stop being apologetic about leadership when we're put into it. On another survey question, when we asked about the barriers that they had personally faced in taking on more leadership roles in networks, the results largely lined up with the barriers they faced for women in general. However, there were a few differences. The largest number of women made comments about time being the greatest barrier, as opposed to caregiving responsibilities, which were identified as a barrier in the question about barriers to women in general. As a mom myself, I can verify that these two could certainly be related. In the survey and in the convening data, women mentioned time constraints relating not only to kids, but also to work, partners, pets, property, elder care, and single parenting. After time, other personal barriers were social norms, recognition, inclusion, and caregiving. Do you ever feel like this woman in the picture? It reminds me of what they call the mental load that mothers carry. This mom looks like she is trying to schedule carpool for her son's soccer game during a break in her work meeting. Survey respondents said things like, the greatest barrier is time, always time, and I run out of time to do it all. Women also commented in the survey and convenings on things like juggling time, caring for children, work demands, dinners with husband, responsibilities at home, other activities, and having time for self-care. Time became even more of a challenge for some women during COVID, such as one who said, it's so hard to leave the computer or not go back to put in more time. You went from working within the structure, you had things you wanted or needed to do after work, and so you had to stop working. Now there's not a lot going on due to COVID, and you just keep working 24 hours a day. Social norms and ingrained community beliefs are also a major barrier for women's leadership. One survey respondent said, the biggest challenge in a small community is having full support as a female. Another said, I've experienced the perceived notion that as a woman, I should automatically agree to be the committee secretary without being offered chair or vice chair. And a third woman said, socioeconomics and racial barriers are factors in other leadership networks. Sometimes you get asked to be on a board because of the color of your skin, but they don't want your input. You're just a checked item on the list of inclusivity. I get asked to be on committees and panels for my expertise, but they get my work and knowledge for free when everyone else is on payroll. Recognition was called out as a personal barrier as well. One woman described this saying, it's difficult to pinpoint. Sometimes it just feels like my voice is not heard. Another said in a convening, women who are effective leaders are not afraid to be who they are and embracing that authenticity, not being afraid to be a woman. We've dressed like men or felt like we should act in a certain way. And in lots of ways, that's what society demands of us as female leaders. But that is changing. Embrace who we are as women in terms of our thought process and our personality. That is more than enough and very, very powerful in its own right. Many women commented on the need for allies. One said, women are targets, especially on social media. It's really debilitating to women to be attacked, so we have to have others speak for us. Not speak for us, speak up for us. Another barrier that goes hand in hand with recognition is inclusion. One woman said at a convening that as an outsider, it took a lot for me to even find out about things going on. Most of the advertising is on the radio, but I don't listen to the radio, so I didn't know. And most of the businesses here in town have never had Facebook pages. So sometimes it's a matter of simple communication and not having access to the information. Another woman said in her survey response that in some instances, when I have been in leadership roles, the men on the boards aren't always supportive or willing to try doing things in new ways. Frustrating. Finally, another top barrier that may overlap with time is caregiving responsibilities. A survey respondent said, childcare, most of the executives golf and network that way. Another said, it's important to me and my husband to have family dinners and time together. I won't compromise family time for more leadership roles. Another said, if I were to take on more leadership roles, I would need my husband to do more at home. One woman at a convening said, childcare is huge. I've seen a couple of leadership programs that would be really great to be a part of. I had to turn them down because of the childcare factor. We aren't from here, so I can't drop a couple of young kids off with people that we aren't familiar with for an extended length of time. I think childcare networks or having some kind of access to that would help women be able to take on leadership roles, positions, or trainings that I know are out there. So what did our study reveal about how we can better support women? Encouraging others and providing emotional support was a theme that came up again and again in both the convening and the survey data. One woman said, it's important to encourage women to step into these spaces to practice leadership. Sometimes it takes someone else saying, you can do this, or you'd be great at that. Another thing we can do to help women recognize their own potential. One individual said, a lot of women in my community are doing these things already, but it's just what they do. They would not necessarily consider it leadership. It's just what they do as far as being female in their family or in their community. Another stressed that leaders can and should be cultivated from within the communities that are most impacted by the issues, problems, events that are relative today. They have the solutions and the ideas. Many women in our study commented on how they need someone to bounce ideas off of and that they learn from another woman's wisdom and experience. For example, one convening participant said, I try to help them take the first and then the second steps. The hardest thing to me is just taking that first step. Sometimes you don't know how to start, so having a mentor, someone else around to help you figure out that beginning, where you're uncertain or where your next step is and where you need to go from there. That's a big help for a lot of people. Did I miss a slide? No. One way to provide guidance and support for women is through networks. What did the study reveal about what a woman's network should look like? In the survey responses and the convening discussions, a theme that came up time and again was the need for learning leadership skills from someone intentionally modeling it. A dedicated women's network could provide this opportunity to learn from one another. One participant said, we all need to get better at sharing our stories, the good, the bad, and what we've learned, so that others can be inspired. Another woman said in her survey response, there isn't a lot of precedent on policies and procedures, relaying of information, and learning from experienced individuals. It's more of a learn as you go situation, and confusion, miscommunication, and lack of follow-through tend to be the result of these types of leadership dynamics. In one of the convenings, a woman talked about a supervisor who sat her down and had her run through specific leadership scenarios, coaching her on her responses. Another important component of a women's leadership network is inviting new women into spaces to practice leadership. One woman said at a convening, I moved into my small community and it takes a while to get your footing. A woman reached out to me to ask if I could help with this project. She gave me the welcome mat to enter into the project and showcase my talents and strengths. She provided me with an opportunity. Another said, we always look to the most senior person. I found out in that first meeting that it was the newest person that was going to be the chair for the year. That was me. It was such an ideal way to learn people's names and be in front of the group and call people to order. I practice that now as much as I can, particularly with young women who haven't had many opportunities to be at the head of a room, hold everybody's attention, and make decisions on the spot. It's a great practice. Many women in the study also made comments about the importance of collaborative leadership and sharing power. One said, everyone had our roles, even though she was the boss. We would call ourselves the women of the round table because that is how we would strategize. Another talked about how women are natural connectors who demonstrate web-like thinking. And in one convening, a woman said, a diversity of backgrounds, lived experiences, and perspectives should be encouraged. It's when differences of perspective and a variety of lenses can come together that we get a more complete, accurate picture of problems and solutions. Many women commented in the survey and the convenings that virtual opportunities save time when you live in a rural area like Northwestern Minnesota. One said, a year ago to have this convening, we would have all had to invest many hours, energy, and a great deal of time and money. And another said, well, virtual isn't ideal, it does promote equity and access. So from the survey findings grew a few key recommendations for the 100 and 100 project. The first is to provide childcare, meals, and any other time savers. This could include virtual opportunities to connect, but I think we heard loud and clear that women are so strapped for time. And so anything we can do to build in time savers into these network experiences will increase the likelihood that more women can participate. The second is that we need to be providing women-focused leadership opportunities. So the research shows that we need to create safe spaces for women to practice those leadership skills. And a good way to do this is to involve participants in leading parts of the meetings as much as possible. It also was very clear that women are craving those mentorship relationships to be paired up with a woman who perhaps has more experience in a certain field. And one thing I would caution about this is that the research shows that that mentorship can be a burden for the women who are already in leadership, that because we have so few women in those elected positions or in those top leadership roles, they get asked to do a lot. And so the danger is that they are already stretched too thin. And so to then assign several mentees to that leader becomes burdensome. And so, I'd encourage you to sort of think broadly about networks, and there are lots of different models of mentorship. You can do peer mentorship circles where women who are sort of new to leadership gather and learn from one another. You can do multiple mentorship where a woman is assigned to different mentors for different purposes. And so by using sort of a creative or innovative combination of those different kinds of mentorship, that could be a really positive thing for both the mentors and the mentees. And also encourage leadership practices that feel authentic for women. So if we think about women as natural connectors, perhaps this leadership network could focus on things like network weaving and collaborative leadership to really build up those kinds of skills that women tend to exhibit in leadership roles. And perhaps most importantly, what we heard from this research is that it's not enough to just support women in developing their leadership skills, but women are facing a lot of barriers in the community. And so we must address the community mindsets and structural barriers. One study participant said, strong community support is needed to encourage female leadership. Women have a high bar to clear in leadership roles, as you must prove yourself. And another reiterated that community development is incredibly important. So I leave you with these questions. Given what we've learned in this research study, how can 100 rural women help address barriers to women's leadership? How can 100 rural women support women leaders? And how can 100 rural women grow regional women's networks? And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Teresa. And if you have any questions for me about the research that we did this year, or if you have any thoughts about these questions related to how do we take what we've learned and apply it to the 100 and 100 project moving forward and to 100 rural women. So thanks so much.